Welcome, everyone. My name is Judy Vauquier, and I'm the co-host for Sounding Board this year. This is our first presentation of our series that is a joint program between UCSD Oceanids and the Faculty Club at UCSD. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've been meeting by Zoom, but hopefully in the new year, in February, we will start meeting again at the lounge in the Faculty Club. I welcome Oceanids members today, and also I see we have many other guests today, and I believe they're probably from the League of Women Voters primarily, and I welcome you. If you're interested in hearing more of our presentations and getting involved in other activities of Oceanids, I suggest that you take a look at our website or talk to Mary Hanson, our speaker today. So Oceanids is a social and service organization. It started at Scripps Oceanography in 1952 and then is now UCSD wide. And we have many different activities and give scholarships for graduate students and support many of the student activities on campus. So one of the activities is this sounding board, which is always interested in presenting relevant, important topics by eminent speakers. And my co-chair is Nigella Hilgarth. So she and I will be co-hosting and co-chairing these. So what I would like to do now is introduce our speaker, Mary Hanson, who is a member of UCSD Oceanids. We're very lucky that now that she is retired from teaching French, she is involved in many volunteer organizations, including Oceanids, where she's an active member of the board, as well as being on the Speakers Bureau for the League of Women Voters. And today she's going to talk about the propositions on the November ballot. And just a housekeeping item, she is going to talk about the state propositions first, and then she is going to take your questions in the chat. So as she goes along, if you have questions about any of the propositions, then please put it in the chat, and she'll stop after the state propositions, and I'll read those to her, and she'll answer as many as she can, and then she'll save time for the local propositions, and hopefully we'll have time to answer questions about those at the end. So without further ado, Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you so much for this great turnout we're having.
Well, thank you, Judy. Why is that not moving? Oh, it did. Sorry. It didn't happen. All right. So this is the League of Women Voters. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters Speakers Bureau. And I think most of you are familiar with the organization, and some of you are members. We're an outgrowth of the women's suffrage movement. It was founded in 1920 when women got the vote. I joined shortly after that and have been an active member for a number of years now. We're a nonpartisan organization. That simply means that we don't support or oppose political parties or candidates, but we do get involved in issues, public policy, good government, all of that. But today, my role will be not telling you how to vote, trying to influence how you vote. So I'm not wearing the advocacy hat. You will see in a couple instances where we've signed a ballot argument, but my role is to try to unpack these as best I can to help you make your decision, and maybe even inspire to dig a little deeper, because in the time we have, it'll just be an overview. So the next place I think you might want to go is the League of Women Voters website, just lwvsandiego.org. And when you get on the website, it'll look something like this. Here's a good place to start, election info, or up here to the to voter service and how to make ballot choices. And when you get on this website, it might take you to other resources. So you could get your voter guide online as well, you know. But the one that I love, and I know some of you like because you've told me, is Voter's Edge. You could go there to just get the quick overview, or you can really get in the weeds and it'll take you to editorials and other information if you really want to dig deep in some of these. That also has the candidates. So what you do is go to votersedge.org and you put in your address and your ballot pops up. And it's a lot of fun. You can get kind of one of these things that you could really go down the rabbit hole if you like this sort of things. So I highly recommend votersedge.org. So, like I said, I'm not going to be advising you on how to vote, but maybe helping people think about how to approach these. So especially the state positions. Now, the local ones, none of them were put on by initiative. They were put on by a government agency, the Board of Supervisors or the City Council. But all but one of the state position props were put on by the initiative process. The resources it takes to do that, as you know, are considerable. So somebody, some entity, some interest really has an agenda. Now, that's not meant to be loaded. It may be an agenda that you fully support, or it may not. But you just have to keep in mind that it's about changing the way things are now. And somebody really wants that change. And so you have to decide if that's beneficial to you, or in my opinion, even more importantly, is it good public policy? Does it benefit Californians? So that's a good way to think about them, I think. We always have to make this disclaimer that even in this, your little booklet here, and the same thing you'll get locally, the arguments that you see from the proponents and opponents are not vetted for accuracy. Some might be just fine, particularly if they're just restating what the proposition would do. But when they start saying going after the other side, then you have to be a little more skeptical. So it's always important for me to say that these aren't necessarily 100% accurate and do not represent the league's viewpoint. So moving right along, California state props might amend the Constitution, might make new statutory law, might do both. And I talked about how they get on the ballot. Here they are. One was put on by the legislature, and you think, well, why 26? Why not 2? It's that California decided a few years ago to have a running tab. So next time we vote on these, we'll start with Prop 32. And that's kind of to not have a Prop 13 every cycle, I think. It's confusing. So Prop 1, this was put on the ballot by the legislature. And as you can guess, it was a direct outgrowth of the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. And the thinking was behind this is that similar legal arguments about privacy were what helped provide the legal perspective in California for reproductive freedom. Well, if that was shot down at the federal level, then the legislature, or most of the legislators, felt that there would be additional protection if you specifically put reproductive rights into the California Constitution. So that's the rationale behind it. If passed, it would guarantee rights not only to abortion, but to contraception, because some people see that, feel that that might also be threatened. It's really not a budgetary thing. Here are some of the entities that have signed the argument in favor. And the proponents say that it would enshrine fundamental rights to abortion and contraception in the California Constitution, and that doctors, nurses, and other health professionals agree that Prop 1 is necessary to keep intimate medical decisions with individuals and their health providers. Opponents argue that women already have the right to choose under current California law, and that the recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling did not and will not change this, that it's not needed to protect women's reproductive rights. They also argue that it's an extreme and costly proposal that allows unrestricted late-term abortions and punishes taxpayers because abortion seekers from outside California will swamp California resources. Okay, so a yes vote means you favor amending the California Constitution to guarantee reproductive rights. A no vote means you don't think this belongs in the Constitution. You might have seen an ad or two about Props 26 and 27. They're both about gambling, but they do different things. So this and the remaining props we'll talk about were put on the ballot by the signature gathering process, but they're initiatives. So as you know, California has strict rules about gambling. Even in the gaming casinos on tribal lands, it bans sports betting, roulette, dice games, and it does allow horse bet racing, but the state strictly controls gambling, and it has compacts with 79 tribes. If Prop 26 passes, it would allow the roulette, dice games, and sports wagering on tribal lands. It's interesting, if you look at this map, you can see all the little dots in San Diego County. We have a lot of opportunity in San Diego County to gamble. If this passes, it would allow in-person sports betting, roulette, and dice games on tribal lands as authorized by compacts. Also, interestingly, hence the little horse here, it also allows sports wagering at certain licensed horse racing tracks in California. But people under 21 can't do it. Probably increase state revenues. Maybe people would do the sports betting and instead of other things. There might be a shift in revenue, but it's it would augment the budget. Supporters say that it limits sports wagering to adults only, that it supports Indian self-reliance by providing revenue for tribal education, healthcare, and other vital services, that it promotes safe, responsible gaming and helps stop and prevent illegal gambling. And you can see with each of these, we try to update them, the amount of money that have been raised in support or opposition. In some cases, there's a lot. That's true with 26 and 27, others almost nothing. Opposing 26, people say that it's a massive expansion of gaming that will lead to more underage gambling and addiction, that is sponsored by 5 wealthy gaming tribes who want to expand their monopoly on gambling to include sports betting, that it will devastate other communities of color, and that it leaves casino workers unprotected from worker safety, compensation, and other worker protection laws. So in summary, a yes vote means that tribal casinos and racetracks could offer in-person sports betting, and casinos would have other games that they could offer. There are also some new enforcement mechanisms in this. A no vote means you want to keep sports betting illegal in California, and the tribal casinos would continue to offer what they're offering now. Moving on to 27. The group leading the campaign for Prop 27 is called Californians for Solutions to Homelessness and Mental Health Support. That isn't the group that's funding it, though. It's 3 different online sports companies. One is DraftKings, for example, which pops up when I watch tennis. So Prop 26 was about in-person gambling. This one is about online gambling on your computer, on your smartphone. So in 2018, the US Supreme Court struck down the federal law that bans sports betting. Well, you could do it in Nevada, no place else. But since then, since it's become legal, a number of states, but not California, have legalized sports betting. That doesn't mean because it's illegal in California that Californians have not been engaging in it. It's estimated that billions of dollars of sports betting has been placed in sports bets, either through bookies or offshore companies. So again, what it would do is allow online sports betting, and some of the proceeds would go to combat homelessness, and some of it would go to smaller tribes that don't have casinos. In fact, the smaller tribes could engage in compacts with the sports betting companies. So would the casinos. But the big difference between this and 26 is it could happen anywhere. It's not confined to, you know, if this was legal, once we got off this talk, we could then switch to one of the gaming sites and bet on sports. In terms of the fiscal bottom line, the first thing it would go to would be regulatory costs, but there would be 15% of the money distributed to tribes that are not involved in sports betting, and a certain amount unknown, but would go, there would be a fund, and some of that would be mandated to address homelessness. A new fund, it's called the California Online Sports Betting Trust Fund. But probably it would bring considerable money into the state. So the supporters say that it does require state-of-the-art technology to ensure that minors don't place bets, and it bans betting on youth sports. And that is true. It provides hundreds of millions of dollars to support programs that alleviate homelessness and supportive mental health and addiction programs. And it requires that 15% of the tax revenue goes to disadvantaged non-gaming tribes. It also requires strict auditing of the use of the money that would go into this online sports betting trust fund. Opponents say that online sports betting will not generate jobs or create investment because the sports betting operators that are behind this proposition would retain most of the profits. They also say that because it'd be so easy, you could just get on your computer or phone and use a credit card, that those who struggle with gambling addiction are even more at risk. And they argue that there's evidence that online gambling is far more addictive than in-person gambling. They also say it's a deceptive measure promoted by out-of-state companies, and that online gambling is not the solution to homelessness or other social ills. So a yes vote means that licensed tribes or gambling companies could offer online sports betting over the internet to people over 21 and older. And then it would, as I said, some of it would go to support small tribes and homelessness alleviation projects. A no vote would simply mean that sports betting would continue to be illegal in California. So the horse racing is different. This is sports betting on NFL football, baseball. Also, it would allow betting on like award shows, but not on elections, fortunately. So what is the difference between 26 and 27? This often comes up. So 26 is only in person and only at 4 licensed racetracks and the casinos. It would allow for roulette, craps, and other dice games in casinos, and it's largely backed by Native American tribes. 27, on the other hand, legalizes sports betting online. It allows out-of-state gaming companies to partner with Native American tribes who do not have casinos, as well as those who do, and some revenues go to alleviating homelessness. Okay. So something very wholesome here, the arts and music education. It's another initiative, and it provides additional funding for arts and music education in public schools. So this comes up a lot, this old Prop 98, which guarantees a certain amount of revenue every year to fund public schools. So it's around 40%. That's a minimum. It could be more, but there isn't any direct source of funding for K-12 arts and music education. So the people who put this on the ballot feel that that aspect of education has got the short end compared to, let's say, STEM. So some people say STEM should be STEAM and include the arts. It would be an amount equal to at least 1% of the total Prop 98 funding received the prior year. But it is an addition to. It's not a tax. It would come out of the general fund, but it would not take away from any other programs, but the amount would be minimally 1% of those Prop 98 funds spent the previous year. I hope that makes sense. All schools would receive some funding. Those with more low-income students would receive additional money. Larger schools would be required to spend 80% of the funding to hire new staff and 20% for funding for training and supplies. It would increase state expenditures by about $1 billion per year. And again, it's over and above existing Prop 98 constitutional requirements. Here are some of the supporters. The first group is the one who got it on the ballot. Oh, I'm sorry. Supporters say that Prop 28 would increase funding for educational programs without raising taxes. It's currently the only 1 in 5 California public schools has a dedicated teacher for arts and music programs. Arts and music education can improve a student's personal and academic life. And although there are no organized campaign for against Prop 28, some argue that earmarking spending in this way could limit the state funds available for other spending and future needs. 20 years from now, this requirement could reduce our flexibility as needs change for public spending. All right, so a yes vote means you approve of the statute to provide additional funding for arts and music education in California public schools. A no vote means you prefer to leave this to the local level. Prop 29 is another proposition about kidney dialysis centers. And if you think, well, haven't we voted on these before? Yes, it's the sense of deja vu. It's basically was put on the ballot by the labor union, the SEIU, and there is something of an ongoing labor dispute between this union and the big companies that do dialysis. And in case you're not familiar with it, when it comes to end-stage renal disease, this is well, there are very few things, and this is the big one, that Medicare covers for people under 65. So if you have the kind of kidney disease that's advanced enough that you need dialysis to keep you living, basically, if you have private insurance, it covers it for the first 30 months. And then after that, Medicare picks it up. So because of that, the federal government has pretty strict regulations about dialysis clinics because they're footing the bill. So I mentioned this before, that it's the third attempt by this union to pass legislation as part of to give them leverage to unionize. The previous propositions in 2018 and 2020 were rejected, however. This is a little different in its requirement for staffing. The previous one said it had to be at all times that they're open a physician. This would allow a physician's assistant or a nurse practitioner. And if that wasn't practicable, telehealth could work at least for the first year or so. There are also some new transparency requirements. The bottom line is that it could cost more because these new requirements would affect the California Department of Public Health. So that you would have higher administrative costs to monitor that the new requirements were actually being done properly. Supporters state that requiring a physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant to be present during a dangerous procedure like dialysis is common sense and a matter of patient safety. They say it's made more feasible by the provision allowing use of telemedicine. They say that the big corporations that operate dialysis clinics can easily make these required staffing changes and continue to make millions of dollars of profits a year. It's interesting, there are dialysis patients who are for and dialysis patients signing against. Opponents remind us that every dialysis patient is already under the care of their own kidney specialist. They contend that it would worsen our healthcare worker shortage by putting this personnel in administrative positions instead of doing clinical care, that the resulting increase in costs could cause some clinics to close. Okay, so a yes vote means that you approve of adding this staffing and reporting requirements. A no vote means that things would remain as they are and that California would primarily rely on federal regulations. Prop 30, another initiative, and this is funding for cleaner air and wildfire prevention. And this is a tax increase, but only for people earning over $2 million annually. It's an initiative, I mean, it's a statute and not a constitutional amendment. So we know that there's been a lot of activity in California the last few years about climate change, about reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And the key requirement is taking them down to 1990 levels by 40%. And of course, one of the key ways that we can do this is by more of us driving what are called ZEVs. And EV is an electric vehicle, but ZEV is zero emission vehicle. Hydrogen vehicles might come online. So that's why the new acronym ZEV. Another law that, and this is relevant, as you'll see, is that ride-sharing companies like Lyft and Uber need to have 90% of their drivers using ZEVs as soon as 2030. Then, just as all of us were working on these, the California Air Resources Board, goes usually by CARB, issued a new regulation that 35% of new cars sold in California be ZEVs by 2026 and 100% by 2035. And that regulation came online after this proposition qualified for the ballot. So again, you'd have an income tax increase of 1.75% on incomes above 2 million. They would be allocated as follows. If you don't have a big computer, you might not be able to see that 45% would go to help individuals, but not necessarily individuals, but businesses, including Lyft and Uber, buy new vehicles. 20% would go for wildfire protection and prevention, and 35% for more charging stations. Now, this would sunset in January 2043, and it could even expire earlier if and when there are 3 years in a row that goal, that 1990 goal of the 40% reduction is met. That's pretty optimistic, though. So it's estimated that this tax increase would bring in up to $5 billion in additional revenue, and it would be split about $3 to $4 billion for the ZEV funding and up to $1 billion for wildfire response. And it could decrease state and local costs for wildfire suppression prevention, but that's unknown. Supporters say the Prop 30 will reduce catastrophic wildfires and air pollution for vehicles, and that it only applies to the wealthiest 0.2% of Californians, ensuring that they pay their fair share to help reduce air pollution. And I need to mention, well, it'll come up later in the arguments. Never mind, sorry. Opponents say that Californians already pay high income taxes and that additional funding for ZEVs and wildfire suppression could be paid from our surplus, and that we're already spending more than $50 billion for a multi-year climate investment, including $10 billion for ZEVs. They also say that income tax revenue, this increased revenue could cause the state to reach its spending limits, and because this spending would be mandated, other things might have to be cut. Finally, because Lyft is one of the main, they're spending a lot of the money to get this on the ballot and support this, and that it's just an attempt to get taxpayers to help foot the bill for their requirement, for the rideshare company's requirement to increase the number of ZEVs that they use. So a yes vote means you're in favor of this increased tax and targeted revenue for ZEVs and wildfire response. A no vote, you prefer the status quo and are opposed to this tax increase. So this is the last of the state ones, then we'll pause for a couple questions. This is the only referendum on the ballot. And we always remind people what a referendum is. That means that it's about a state law that has passed. And if the opponents to a piece of legislation succeed in their signature drive to get it on the ballot, that immediately stops the legislation from going into effect. So then we as voters serve as the legislature, and we vote to affirm the bill that this is a referendum on or to oppose it. So this was put on the ballot basically by the coalition, California Coalition for Fairness, but that's the tobacco company's PAC. They're the ones who got this referendum on the ballot. And it's about flavored tobacco products. The idea behind it and from the legislature is that a lot of kids are starting with the vaping, and those are flavored. And then when they, if they smoke cigarettes, they're much more likely to prefer the flavored cigarettes. So it's just another effort to suppress tobacco consumption. So it's a referendum on SB 793. It didn't go into effect once the referendum was filed. Okay. So this law passed in 2020, and it bans the sale of flavored tobacco products. That includes vape pens and menthol cigarettes. So adults are more likely to smoke cigarettes, while youth are more likely to use what are called ENDS, or electronic nicotine delivery systems. About 20% of adults and 50% of youth use flavored cigarettes, generally menthol cigarettes. So it would have a fiscal effect. If everybody stopped smoking, we would not collect any more tobacco taxes. So if this does succeed in reducing the number of people who use tobacco, then that revenue would come down. I should add that there is an enforcement mechanism, but it's against the stores or the vending machine operators. If they continued to sell the prohibited products, they'd be fined $250 per sale. There would not be a fine on individuals using the products. Here are some of the entities that support Prop 31. They contend that Big Tobacco has spent millions lobbying so that California retailers could continue selling the candy-flavored products they market to children. That more than 2 million middle and high school students use e-cigarettes, and 4 out of 5 kids who have used tobacco started with a flavored product. And that, contrary to a claim by the tobacco industry, this does not criminalize individuals from purchasing or using these products. Opponents agree that youth should not have access to tobacco products, but this could be achieved without imposing a total prohibition on products that millions of adults choose to use. They say it's unfair because some things are exempt, expensive, cigars, hookah, and that it will hurt small local businesses and jobs as products are pushed from licensed conscientious retailers to an underground market, leading to increased crime and other social and criminal justice concerns. They also point out that the state would lose revenue that supports healthcare. So again, with a referendum, you have to be careful. A yes vote means you support the legislation that prohibits selling these flavored tobacco products. A no vote means you wish to repeal the legislation and believe retailers should be able to continue selling flavored tobacco products. Okay, so Judy, I can't see the chat. So are there any questions that you want to?
We only have one question. I want to
Oh
thank Kim Senior A. Parr first for putting in our website for Oceanids is in the chat for those of you who are interested. There's one comment that you're welcome to look at in the chat, but there's one question for you from Mary Cutchin. And Mary, if I don't get the second half of it, I can't quite understand. You might want to ask it. It says, regarding Prop 1, the voter guide opposition says that abortions could be allowed unconditionally. That is very late term. And also it says that the fetus may be normal. Oh, I see.
Okay.
You can still have an abortion even if the fetus is normal. Is this correct?
Okay. I'll address that as best they can. Current law in California does it's not abortion on demand. There's a couple things. It has to be done by a licensed physician. In a licensed facility, a licensed physician. Also, once fetal viability is reached, if the fetus could live outside the womb, under California law, you cannot perform an abortion unless to save the woman's life. So there's nothing in Prop 1 that changes that underlying those existing statutes and limitations. There's nothing that specifically affirms it either. So the opposition is able to make that's kind of how they can make that argument. It really just doesn't address those kind of details. It's just about putting the reproductive rights into specifically into the Constitution, and not depending on current statutes which permit it, or privacy rights. Does that help, Mary?
I think that, yeah, that answers it. Thank you. Okay, I don't see anything else in the chat. I'm sure everybody knows how to use the chat, so I think your presentation was very clear. I know, I mean, in fact, it was very clear. I think we probably have a lot of comments, but they're not really questions for you, so nobody
Okay.
comments.
I'll have to look at those later.
Yeah. So if you'd like, you could go ahead with the local ones.
Well, then that's interesting, because our experience so far, and some of us doing this are doing almost a talk a day, some in person, which I did the other night, some over Zoom, and that there have been more questions, kind of understandably, because some of you have had a chance to look at this, but the equivalent document from, it may be online, it's online now, but there's actually been more questions about the local ones. And maybe because they're closer to home, whatever. So I'll do my best. In addition to these 5, there is Measure U, which is a bond issue. If we have time, I'll get to that. All right, so A through H, and all of these were put on by a governmental jurisdiction. None of them are initiatives, and that includes the bond measure. So Measure A, this is the only county-wide measure we'll be voting on, and it was put on the ballot by the Board of Supervisors. And it only applies to the unincorporated areas of the county. And so we're going from tobacco to cannabis here. There are already 5 cannabis stores or retail outlets for cannabis in the unincorporated areas. But unlike some jurisdictions, like the city of San Diego, there hasn't been any tax put in place. And part of the rationale, one of the arguments that was made when cannabis was made legal is that it would provide a lot of income for local governments. So this would create a tax on cannabis business in unincorporated areas. The revenue would go to the general fund, which could be spent on anything that that they spend money on, roads, whatever. It also allows the Board of Supervisors to change the rate of the tax, and it does provide tax relief in the event of disaster or crop failure. But I was always under the impression that marijuana was a hardy crop. At least it was in Iowa, where I grew up. All right, so how did it get on the ballot? Well, this cannabis is kind of a growing business. There are already the 5 businesses, but they aren't taxed, even though they require county services. It would generate a fair amount of money annually, less administrative costs. Whenever you have a new tax, you have to have people staffed to regulate it. And I should say that it applies to every aspect of the cannabis business, from growing it, manufacturing it, distributing it, and selling it. And it would not be a double tax. So, for example, San Diego taxes cannabis business. This would only be, if you're in the unincorporated part of the county, you would only be taxed by this county tax. All right, more accurately, a better way of saying it, if this county tax would not apply to you if you have a cannabis business that's already being taxed by another city. Okay, supporters, and again, this was put on by the Board of Supervisors, say that it's a bipartisan solution to advance a safe, regulated, and legal cannabis market in San Diego County, keeping tax revenues here to fund parks, fire safety, health, and so forth, and increased enforcement of illegal cannabis operations, that it would be paid solely by cannabis businesses in the unincorporated communities and not be a double tax. I already said that. Okay. The arguments against say it's unfair because it only applies to businesses in an unincorporated San Diego County, but the revenue can be used for any program in the county. And that because it only applies in unincorporated areas, only those voters should have been allowed to have voted on this. So yes vote means that there's a new tax going to effect. It authorizes the Board of Supervisors to impose a new tax on cannabis businesses in the unincorporated areas of the county. A no vote means the status quo. These new businesses would not be taxed. Okay, Measure B. This is about trash pickup. Currently, about half of San Diegans get free trash pickup. This is unusual. It's the only jurisdiction in the state that where people don't pay a fee for their trash pickup. However, this Measure B does not impose a fee. It simply removes the prohibition against imposing a fee. It allows the city to charge a fee for city provided waste management. Before you could establish a fee, you'd have to do a fair amount of study, because by state law, any fee cannot exceed the cost of providing the service. So one of the main things in there is a cost of service study to determine the feasibility, the amount, everything. What would it cover? What kind of service? You'd have public hearings. Do people want recycling twice a week? Do they want bulky items? So those details are not in here. I have to make that clear. Well, how did it get here? 3 different grand juries recommended that it be put on the ballot, and various community groups. And again, in the interest of full disclosure, the league has signed the ballot argument in favor of this, but a lot of community groups have asked the city council. So there was no initiative drive. The council decided to put this on the ballot. And just a little background. About 100 years ago, San Diegans voted for that the city should take care of trash collection, but no fee was ever imposed. And then in the 1980s, by popular vote, the People's Ordinance passed, and that requires the city to provide most single-family residences with free weekly trash collection services. However, people living in apartment buildings, condos, and some single-family residences have to pay for private trash collection. So if you live on a gated community or on a private road, and we have a perfect example right here. So my co-host Judy lives right next to me, and on a street called Via Valverde, and I'm one up on a street called Caminito Valverde. She and Vic have free trash collection, but Jay and I, because it's technically a private street, pay for private haulers. We pay through our HOA. Now, there are arguments that that's perfectly fair because it's a private street. I just give this example to show how it works, that you can have 2 houses right next to each other. One gets trash pickup and one doesn't. So again, depending on the level of service, this is what's estimated any fee that might be imposed would be. Here are some of the people who have signed in favor of it. They say that it could allow for new trash services, such as I mentioned. Also, one of the arguments is it would help San Diego achieve our climate action goals. And also, a mandate was just passed that we need to compost our food waste. Food waste, people, I'm actually involved in this issue a little bit through the league. We don't realize how much food waste and its decomposition and so forth contribute to climate change, to methane, to greenhouse gases. So a law was passed in California that requires jurisdictions to collect food waste and organic waste for composting rather than having it go into the landfill. They also argue that San Diego is the only California city that does not charge for trash services. It comes out of the general fund, in case I didn't make that clear. And they say the strain on our general fund affects what can go for other services. And then they say it's become inequitable because all San Diegans are subsidizing the service, but only about half receive free trash collection. And that it would, posing a fee would allow San Diego to modernize its waste management system. Opponents say that we already pay for trash collection and that the voters made it clear when they passed the People's Ordinance in the 80s that this is how they want our property tax, in other words, the general fund, to pay for this, and that we don't need yet another fee on top of the already high cost of living in San Diego. And the opponents say a better solution would be to apply the People's Ordinance to everyone and make city collection free to all households. They also say that it would cost you between $350 and $500 a year. So a yes vote means that you approve amending the city charter to allow the city to charge a fee for waste management. No vote means that the status quo remains in place and that the People's Ordinance for free trash collection would continue. Measure C. It's a redo, as you will see, put on the ballot by the city council. So there is a height limit that was voted in by the people in 1972 that in the designated coastal zone, buildings could not exceed 30 feet. What's proposed here is that the area in yellow, which is basically bordered by the San Diego River to the north and Highway 5 to the east, that portion of the coastal zone, that this 30-foot height limit would be removed. Now you can see it's definitely coastal, but it's not oceanfront, it's not bayfront. The community planning group in this area does want to update it, development, have some redevelopment, including updating the sports arena, and agrees that the height limit should be removed. So again, this is a redo. The same thing was passed in 2020, but then a suit was brought, and so it couldn't go into effect. They wanted a better EIR. They said the EIR just looked at views and not other issues. So the city did a new EIR. There's a new lawsuit, just filed not too long ago. The bottom line is that if you redevelop this area, there could be significant increase in property and sales tax, but the areas would also require more services. Okay, the supporters of Measure C say that removing the height limit and allowing more development in the area could create thousands of affordable homes and good paying jobs and would be a catalyst for modernizing the sports arena, which they claim is obsolete. They say it's also needed to create a more transit-oriented community in the area. And they remind us it does not raise taxes. Opponents, and it's the Save Our Access group that's main entity behind the lawsuits, they argue that it would allow dense construction of expensive residential towers within the coastal zone. They also make the slippery slope argument that this is the beginning, and then one by one other planning areas within the coastal zone would be pressured to remove the height limit. They say it's put on the ballot by politicians to reward their developer and special interest friends with development deals. So Measure C, again, a revote in effect, would remove the 30-foot height limit from this designated area that I showed you on the map. I should have mentioned that the underlying zoning, if there are any height limits within the underlying zoning, those would remain. A no vote means the existing law and the existing height limit would continue. Measure D has to do with PLAs, project labor agreements, which are just a contract between a construction company or building company and a labor union. It might be about wages, working conditions, safety, and is put on the ballot by the city council to amend the municipal code. It's not a charter amendment. So currently there is a ban in San Diego on requiring project labor agreements. This measure would not mandate the use of PLAs, but would remove the prohibition. And the reason the city council put this on the ballot is because a new state law, SB 922, would cut funding from cities with any law, possibly such as the one we have in place, that, quote, prohibits, limits, or constrains these agreements. So we have Prop A. We might remember when we voted on PLAs before, and that banned requiring PLAs, except when state revenue would be lost. So there's a debate whether this new mandate from the state would be a problem, or whether what's in place now is adequate. There's concern about the new state law. In terms of cost, that's very uncertain. Some people say that a PLA actually makes things more efficient and reduces costs. Things get done more quickly, fewer cost overruns and so forth. Other people say no, when you primarily use union labor, it's going to be more expensive. Supporters claim that Measure D helps protect San Diego from losing millions of state funding that is necessary for infrastructure, including meeting climate change threats. They say it would clarify any ambiguity, uncertainty, or potential conflict between the municipal code as it currently stands and California law. That it requires public disclosure of city contracting, including tracking of local hiring to give local citizens priority, and that it empowers the city to pass critical workforce protections and anti-discrimination provisions. The opponents point out that in 2012, voters approved a ballot measure to implement fair and open competition for taxpayer-funded construction projects, and that the provisions in there to protect access for state funding are adequate. They say that Measure D would discriminate against 80% of the local construction workforce, including underrepresented minority groups, that it they say that it discriminates against local apprenticeship programs, such as those sponsored by the National Black Contractors Association. So a yes vote means you want to override this Prop A from 10 years ago and amend the city charter to remove the ban, not mandate, but remove the ban on using PLAs. A no vote means you want to keep Prop A in place and continue the ban on requiring PLAs unless necessary to qualify for outside financing. Measure H is another amendment to the city charter, also put on by the city council. And it has to do with childcare and dedicated parkland and city-owned properties. It would authorize childcare in city-owned recreation facilities and parkland. The city has already, in anticipation of what they hope this passes, 18 libraries, 42 park and rec centers, and 12 office buildings that would be allowed to house childcare. And part of the rationale for putting this on the ballot was the loss of 522 child care centers that closed during the pandemic. We don't really know the fiscal impact because the details of how this would work are not in here. Would if the Y wanted to set up a child care center and a city rec center, would they pay the cost? Would the city, would it be split? It's just not part of what you're voting on here. This is just a permissive thing. What's prohibited now to put child care centers in these city-owned facilities would be allowed. Maybe many would go into play, would come online, maybe very few, if any. The supporters remind us that there are over 74,000 children under the age of 5 who lack access to licensed childcare. This lack of childcare options has only intensified with the pandemic. Measure H would allow working families to no longer have to make the difficult choice between losing their job or taking care of their children. There isn't any opposition, official opposition to Measure H, but I have heard people concerned, kind of again, the slippery slope argument about using parkland for non-park purposes. So there's also a Measure U, but I think we should pause for questions. I'll just tell you quickly that Measure U is a very familiar sounding bond issue put on by the San Diego Unified School Board. It's very similar to ones in the past. There's no official opposition, but of course, people are legitimately concerned about increased indebtedness. And so if anyone of you want to stay after questions, and I can go over Measure U if you'd like. Judy, are there any questions in the chat?
There's one question that says, I live in La Mesa, from Olivia. So San Diego measures don't apply to me. Will Mary be discussing other issues? I don't know if you have anything for La Mesa or other areas.
I don't have the materials. So what happens, Olivia, is if we're asked by a group, if some organization that's based in La Mesa, because San Diego, League of Women Voters of San Diego does include East County, then we would make sure we've prepped on those. But I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to discuss any measures that have come up for either the Grossmont Unified School District, where you and I taught for many years, or City of La Mesa.
Okay, I have a question about Prop C.
Yes.
Because 2020 is not that long ago. I remember voting on that one. And I believe, as you said, they've voted to raise the limit, the 30-foot limit. And so,
well, no, in 2020, they voted to get rid of it. It was put into effect in 72. Yeah.
Yeah. So we got rid of the limit in 2020. And as far as I can tell from your talk, I haven't seen it anywhere else really. The only thing that's changed is that now the city council went back and did an environmental impact report.
A more detailed one. They were immediately sued. And so then that froze it in place. That it did not go into effect because of the lawsuit, because I should have clarified, the judge ruled in favor of the plaintiffs and said that the EIR was not adequate, was inadequate, and that the city would have to redo it, which the city has done. But the same group, and they have other supporters, are continuing to say it's inadequate, that it doesn't address noise and traffic and these kinds of things adequately. It only looks at views. And so very likely, even if this passes it again a second time, it'll go to litigation. And that'll be up to the judge who rules on it to decide if this second go round, if the city's EIR passes muster or not.
Okay, so it sounds like, I'm sorry, I'm not more up on this. I'm hazy about it, but it sounds like somebody's really interested in getting that height limit lifted so that they can develop that area.
Well, the background is a little different in the sense that there's no plan. There's some concepts, but there's no plan in place. But it's, you know, when you drive along Midway, how it looks. It's kind of the land is kind of underutilized and blighted. At least that's what the proponents say. And the sports arena just kind of sits there getting more obsolete. So the planning group for this area, the Citizens Planning Group and the City Council, believe that redevelopment is more feasible if you get rid of the 30-foot height limit. But obviously there are people in the area, particularly I think in neighboring areas like Point Loma or Mission Beach, who don't like this idea and fear that they're next. So that's kind of so they're fighting it. Environmentalists are split, which is happening with climate change because in one of the ways to get people out of their cars, it's argued, is to have more transit-friendly neighborhoods. So if you have denser neighborhoods, infill, which this could bring, then people are more likely to use transit service if it's convenient. But with sprawl, if you take the same housing and put it out in the unincorporated areas or wherever, that's not going to be transit friendly. So you have that side of the environmental argument that wants infill, that's kind of the YIMBY group. And then you have more the NIMBY people who fear the traffic and the noise and so forth. And so you see environmental groups on both sides. Let me see if I can, how quickly I can find that. So these are all opposed, the Earth Day, Save Our Access, and then Carl DeMaio. But then in favor, we have the Community Planning Group, and there are some other environmental groups that do favor. They just didn't sign the ballot argument. So I hope that helps.
I don't see other ones. I just, one of the questions from Fran Shepard was if this taping will be included on the UCSD retirees YouTube site. And that made me realize that probably a lot of our guests today are from the Retirement Association.
Oh, good. Welcome.
I want to welcome you all to Oceanids, and I'm glad Susan Chaffee shares our different presentations with each other so we can enjoy them. So the recording will be on the Oceanids YouTube site, and you can be able to find it there. I'm not sure when, but as soon as I can figure out how to do it. Okay, anyone have any other questions that they would like to ask Mary by unmuting?
No, we fit in the time slot better than I had. When you have an in-person presentation, people are more, sometimes want to ask questions, sometimes they want to a little soapbox or something. But okay, you people are very polite. I appreciate it. Thank you for your interest in the election and listen to all of this. I know some of it's kind of dry. That's just the nature of it. So,
well, I want to thank you very much, Mary. It was really helpful. We always, you're making us think and look further to figure out some of these issues and how we want to vote. And that's good. We'll be informed citizens, and thanks very much for all your hard work on it.
All right. Well, thank you all. Good to see you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye. I'll end the meeting now.
Okay.